You're listening to a Countout Podcast.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Stardom Road podcast here on the Countout Podcast Network. I am your host, as always, Scott Edwards, and with me, as always, is my good friend Trent. Trent, how are you on this fine evening/day for you? It's evening for me, afternoon for you.
I'm doing pretty okay. The sun is shining. We're slowly getting out of the miserable winter into the mixed bag that is early spring. I don't want to say the exciting spring because it takes a while to really get going. You know, you're still dealing with the super cold mornings and the flowers haven't quite blossomed yet. But, like, there is life, which is something.
Baby steps.
Oh, I hear.
Baby steps, yeah.
Yes.
It's night here, so that's about it. It's dark. There you go. There's my outdoors today. It is dark. It's been raining a lot, actually. Too much. But
everyone I talk to, everywhere they are, it's been raining.
Yeah.
I recently did the ChocoCast episode, and Jeff in Japan had a typhoon. Finley got caught in torrential rain at the shows and stuff. We've had a little bit of drizzle, but we
had a lot of rain the past couple of weeks, but it's okay. It's just water. That's the way I look at it. But after that incredible opening conversation, it's only up from here, everyone. It's only up from here that's listening. But as you could tell, I always like to introduce these shows, and I'm like, well, if you read the title, you already have a clue. But we are back on our wrestler dedicated shows, this time diving into the Stardom career of one Kris Wolf. It will be a one-episode special talking about her run in the company, what she meant to the company and many of the wrestlers. Obviously, she is someone who is retired now, but was with Stardom for quite a few years, and it was a big part in many ways. Even if she wasn't world champion or anything, she still played a big part in her own special way. So, I'm excited to get into this one.
Yeah, the Kris Wolf, when you compare to the names we have done so far in the wrestler-centric episodes, we've looked at Arisa Hoshiki, looked at Hana Kimura, we've looked at Himeka. Ironically, none of them have been world champions, admittedly, but the level of where you see them at on, if you're doing an all-time list of where they would sit in terms of strength and stuff, Kris Wolf isn't on their level. But I do think it's important when we're talking about the history of Stardom and going through all the different cast of colourful characters that have walked through these the dojo's doors. Not everyone is going to be a big-time main eventer. Not everyone is going to have the legacy of a world champion tier wrestler. But that doesn't change someone's value or why you would cover them on an episode like this. And I think Kris Wolf, maybe arguably, is the perfect example of what Stardom Road is all about. Because if you want to know about Hana Kimura, there's 100,000 articles being written, many of them by us, talking about her impact and
should read
what
them.
she means. And you should. Same with Arisa, same with Himeka. Kris Wolf isn't necessarily someone who's going to get that same level of coverage, but if you're diving through the archives of Stardom, you're going to see her name pop up a lot just through the different multi-man matches. And she was a part of this company for about 3.5 years, which, when you look especially in the first block of Stardom's history, that's a fairly decent length of time, even before you start considering the fact she's a foreigner, which makes that all the more impressive and makes you ask, well, okay, why was she here for that long? What impact did she have? And it's what Stardom Road is here for.
Yeah, I think the best way to look at her importance is she's someone we found worthy of having an episode, And obviously we're not the end all be all to make that decision, but we felt like an early episode. I think that's more fitting. We've only done, like you said, so many wrestlers episodes. And this is actually one of the first episodes Trent thought of when we were going over them at the very beginning of all this. So I think that's kind of cool that we have gotten to that point. Now we are talking about Kris Wolf, of course, someone who, like you said, the first foreigner we're discussing, and an important foreigner at that. I think her impact and, being a long-term one, kind of, we don't get them a lot, but we're seeing Tekla, obviously, in current day Stardom. She's a long-term foreigner. Of course, she was doing Ice Ribbon before Stardom, but that's kind of the impact. It's not a impact of we get all these long-term foreigners, but when we do, they fit in so well to the roster that you couldn't have that era without them. And I think that's kind of the impact that Kris Wolf had, and especially with the Oedo Tai, and Oedo Tai was so important with Kris Wolf in it, so it should be a lot of fun to kind of dive into that, how she got into wrestling in the first place, and so on and so forth. So I'm excited to do all that.
Yeah, and look, the beautiful thing with covering a foreigner is when they do interviews, we have access to them. We don't need to be running them through translators and understanding that there's certain language barriers, and Google Translate is not the be all and end all in making sense of everything. We can look at the interviews she's had over the years and actually bring it into discussion here, which I do think adds a little bit of extra flavor that we can't always do with a lot of the Stardom talent we might talk about. So we're able to dive into her history a little bit, and I think again, when we're talking about foreigners in Japan, it's not just a matter of how did they get into wrestling. It is actually quite a valuable resource in examining why certain foreigners are there long term, certain foreigners are there mid-term, and some just kind of pop in for a cup of coffee, or I guess in Japan it'd be a cup of green tea.
Yeah, so I think, and my knowledge of Kris Wolf and your knowledge of Kris Wolf are very different, and I think that's why this will be an intriguing episode for those to hear. I know more of Kris Wolf than I'm sure a lot of new people do that watch Stardom, because of course I went back and watched, but most of what I watched were always like, promo segments, like, Oedo Tai had so many great backstage moments, and Kris Wolf, again, key part of just the liveliness of that group. So again, I'm kind of excited to explore it, hearing it from you, and then kind of giving my own thoughts on it. So I'm ready to go.
It's a fun little case study, I guess, because you're coming in as someone who, by the time you started following Stardom, she wasn't a part of the Stardom system. She'd left a couple of years prior. And although that is the case with a couple of wrestlers we've covered already, and Arisa and Hannah are both technically were on the outs just when you were starting to get into it, it's a lot easier to go back and consume their content because of the type of wrestler they were. For myself, getting into Stardom, she had already been in the company for a little while, and so I kind of got to see her as it was happening. And it does provide certain different insights, especially covering a character like Kris Wolf rather than your main eventers and top tiers. Because there's little intricacies that maybe, not saying I'm the be-all and end-all of knowledge here, because I'm not, but following it through, you get to see certain things that you just can't going back and looking at it. But it provides a nice sort of contrast and concept, which I think works for podcasts like this.
That's why we're here. We're here to do something like this. So as everyone can probably tell, Trent will be leading the way here. And so Trent, without further ado, let's talk about Kris Wolf and her career in Stardom.
Yeah, so I think the base thing to start off with is Kris Wolf is someone who joined the company around the end of 2014. It was in August 10th that she made her debut. And it's interesting because, again, you're already sort of chucking the mold out the window for a lot of perceptions when it comes to Joshi wrestling in particular. She came in and debuted a couple of days prior to her 30th birthday. She came into the business not as a wrestling fan. Her knowledge of wrestling prior was like the Hulk Hogan's and the Ric Flairs, that basic, big bodybuilder stuff, and the Midwest and the American scene. And her introduction to Joshi wrestling was literally a friend showing it to her, saying, do you want to do this? Because she was in Japan. She had been teaching English. She got sick of it, like a lot of people who move to Japan to teach English. They get sick of the job. But to stick in Japan, you got to have work. You got to find something to do. And so the friend kind of showed us some Joshi. And the first match she remembers seeing was Yoshiko versus Natsuki Taya. And then she saw Ak Yasukawa versus Kari Hojo. And from those matches, she was interested enough to give it a go. She messaged Stardom and said, hey, how do I become a wrestler? In her best Google translated Japanese. And they wrote back and said, come to a show. If you're interested, come join us, train. And when you pass the test, you can be a pro wrestler. And Kris Wolf, like, one thing you'll pick up with her, both as a character and a person outside of the ring, this whole process is very Kris Wolf. I'll give it a go. See what happens. Let's see if we can have some fun with it. Her going to Japan was very much like that. She got out of a relationship breakup that was very tough, and she went to Japan because she had a friend over there and she'd seen some anime. So why not go over there? She cycled around the country because I can't afford things. I'm just going to cycle. And then you see her get into wrestling, and so she. In an interview with Vice on the Wrestlers documentary, which is one of the sort of things you can go back to looking at her talking about the industry. Like, she talks about wearing the makeup, the double markings on her face. And so I just tried it one day. It looked kind of fun, looked different. People said it looked cool. So I kept doing it. This is Kris Wolf in a nutshell. She just kind of does things, she tries things and has fun with it. And pro wrestling served to be an outlet for her outward ways, for her outlandish character, and it just kind of fit the pro wrestling scene. So she dove in and gave it a go.
And I think that mindset is one that so many fans can connect to. Whether it's in their everyday life, whether it's the very start of trying to get away from something, or just kind of being like, I'll give it a shot. Like, I think a lot of people get into wrestling with that mindset. Truthfully, you watch one thing, you're like, oh, that's pretty good. I'll give this a shot. And then, you end up here in many ways. I think that's how a lot of people do it. You watch something, you maybe play something, and then you're like, okay. And then, next step. And there you are. For her, it went from, oh, this is pretty good to, I'm just going to do it myself. I'll do it myself. No big deal. And while I'm 100% sure the system is not the same to get into Stardom anymore, where you're like, I'll just send an email and go work. I'm grateful that she did, because it's very fitting of her story. It's very fitting of her character, right? Just kind of be like, I'll send an email, see what happens. Like, I just love that part of her story, because I think it makes you connect with her that much more when watching. Because I think any wrestler that you can have that kind of connection to, which isn't always easy, especially like you said earlier, we're doing a Joshi. We don't always understand what people are saying and things like that. We do our best, get translated interviews. With Kris Wolf, even just knowing the story, it's an extra step for us. We didn't have to go through all these things to figure that out. And I love the idea, with that Vice interview of no, they look cool. I was like, oh, this is different, and they look cool. I think that is the embodiment of Kris Wolf. That is the embodiment of what she brought to the table. And I'll say it, I think every company could use a Kris Wolf.
Absolutely. Like, the thing is, someone like Kris Wolf isn't going to come in and become a world champion in most promotions. She won some championships. She won a championship in Stardom. She won some outside of, but she doesn't fit the typical bill. She wasn't a main event caliber wrestler. She was 5'0". She even looked small compared to the kids in wrestling. Like, you see her in a match with young Azumi, like when Azumi is 15 and so, and they're the same height. Whereas Kris Wolf is a 30-year-old woman. There's very much a hard ceiling on what a character like her can accomplish. But that doesn't mean you don't need wrestlers like her. Not everyone in wrestling is going to be a main event level wrestler. And there is value in someone who can play the role. It's like in basketball. You don't have a team of 5 Michael Jordans or LeBron James. You need the role players in the system to make everything work.
The best comparison today, and I she's accomplished more. But I always call Saki Kashima a role player, because you put her in a role, she's going to deliver, right? Saki Kashima is, again, not someone that's built to be a world champion, but she's built to, and as of this recording, she's holding the high speed title. it's stuff like that. It goes so far for these wrestlers, just being able to, oh, you need me in this trios match and I can step up, I'll do that. You need me to even just be a second, I can do that. It's little things like that. It's why Saki Kashima is so beloved now. She took a lot of what, Kris Wolf did for a long time there. Saki was in and then out, so I'm sure she learned one way or the other how to be that role player, but that's the best comparison today. And it's perfect timing because, of course, Saki Kashima got that, deserved singles title reign that she earned, much like Kris Wolf did.
Yeah, it's funny. Kris Wolf, her highest accomplishment in Stardom was that high-speed title. Impressively, she beat Mayu Iwatani and Kagetsu in the same match, pinning both of them at the same time, mind you, to win that title.
Doesn't get much bigger than that.
Exactly.
And Saki Kashima beat the longest reigning high-speed champion. We'll ignore who she pinned, but she did. She did.
And 3 people in that match.
She ended the great reign. That's all that matters. That's what the record books say. Who did it go from? It went from Azumi to Saki Kashima. Just like for Kris Wolf, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah. And I think part of what made Kris Wolf, you mentioned the accessibility and the relatability of a Kris Wolf, and I think it's especially worth mentioning as foreigners, as Westerners going into a Japanese product and watching, as much as we list our favorite wrestlers in Stardom, and we generally have to go down a decent way to start hitting all the foreigners that are coming in.
Yeah.
I think Mariah May's done a fantastic job to establish herself there, but typically we're going through Mayu Iwatani's and Julia's and all of that. It takes a while to get there. But what a foreigner does do is if you're coming into a promotion and you're not used to Japanese wrestling, not used to Joshi wrestling, there is a certain comfort in going, oh, that's someone like me. They speak my language. I can understand them. And that's sort of what Kris Wolf was able to do. And she was there for 3.5, nearly 4 years. So for a lot of people, this is from 2014 to the start of 2018. For a lot of people, this is if you came in Stardom around this time, which is when the Freedom was starting to dominate. So, a lot of people came into Stardom around this time from the outside. So, there's the foreigner I can connect with, I can relate to. You had others coming in. You had Viper coming in. You had Toni Storm coming in. But Kris Wolf was always there. She lived in Japan. She was there for every single show pretty much. And you build up that connection and understanding. It also helps she was in Oedo Tai. But that connect and relatability is massive.
Yeah, I can't stress enough being in that version of Oedo Tai. Yes. That version was so popular. And with that, I think it just made it all the better for Kris, because even when you get foreigners over, I think it always depends on whether they're there, of course. Kris checked that box, like you said, always there, but it's also who are they paired with, right? Who are they doing the most in many ways to make those relationships on camera? Because for a lot of us, that's all we're seeing, whether we're not seeing what they're doing at home and training, we're not seeing that. For us, it's I'm going to make my opinion based off what I see on camera. And you always felt that with Kris Wolf, and you feel that, like you said Mariah May now, you felt that she made the most of her time with Club Venus, and I think that's the most important thing to getting over with fans worldwide. You see that nationally, forget worldwide. You even just see that with them, because if they can feel that you're happy to be there, you're grateful to be there, you care to be there, they're going to give you their appreciation.
And Kris Wolf was very smart. And she jokes about how she came up with the character. Was she just kind of, Rossi after her training said, okay, so what's your wrestling name? And she's like, Kris Wolf. And it's just like, okay, we'll run with that, whatever.
Good name.
Yeah, and it works. And she dove into the gimmick because it came about partially in that training session. And she mentions this in an interview she did while she was doing her test to pass and become a wrestler. She pinned Mayu Iwatani, and when she's doing it, she just kind of let out a "oh," which of course became a very signature part for her gimmick moving forward as the Kris Wolf character. And that kind of led her into coming up with Kris Wolf, the Black Wolf of Oedo Tai should become. And you see her doing her thing in the ring. And going back and watching some of these matches preparing for this episode, I forgot how loud the crowd would actually get for her. Now, obviously, it was at its best in the Shinkiba and the Kurikan Hall. Like it always is, the closer you are to Tokyo, the stronger the fan base is, knows your gimmick, knows your style. Throughout the matches she's having in Kurikan Hall and Shinkiba, you hear the crowd doing the little wolf calls and stuff. And it's such a small thing, but when you're trying to get yourself over and just trying to find every little advantage for someone who doesn't speak the language, she knows very little Japanese. By her own account, she wished she'd learnt it more. Getting yourself over with a foreign audience like that, you need those kind of little gimmicks for them to latch onto. Yeah, she's not going to deliver a Mina Shirakawa heartfelt Japanese promo to the crowd, but she can get over with that little wolf gimmick. It's very visual and the audible. You don't need English, you don't need Japanese. You just need to hear it and respond.
Again, role player. That is such an important role that so many people overlook. And she was so good at it. Getting over just by doing the little wolf things and having the crowd do that back. I like to compare for the fans that are watching now, kind of like Waka Tsukiyama got over. She's not going to be a main event star. She may never even win a title, but she got over by being herself one way or the other, getting over, being true. Her character ultimately ended up being more of a emotional character, which is a little bit different, but in the same sense, that is what you need. And if you are one of the very best, whether you are at the top of the card or the bottom card, you're going to make people care. And that's what Kris Wolf did.
Absolutely. And I think it's important to look at it too. Like, she was with the company for 3.5 to 4 years. Stardom didn't need to keep her on that long if they felt like she wasn't worth it. She established herself, she made a name for herself, and even though she wasn't a main eventer and wasn't going to be a main eventer, she did what she needed to do to build that audience and build that trust. She came in, she was a part of Kimura Monster Goon. From there, she joined the very original iteration of Oedo Tai. She's one of the group's longest-serving members, at least prior to the modern era, where I feel like there's been a lot of stability with that group. But prior to Natsuko Tora taking over, the only person who was in Oedo Tai longer was Kagetsu. Everyone else came and went earlier, quicker. She was there for a long time and saw the evolution of that group from being Kimura Monster Goon to being sort of a mashup of foreigners coming in and established heroes and villains to the golden era, which I think most people, that's their first memories of pre-modern Oedo Tai. Kagetsu, Natsu Samir, Hana Kimura, Tam Nakano, and Kris Wolf was right there with them.
That's how I know Kris Wolf. I know, and of course I came in after. I always remember the first time I was told about Kris Wolf. I had no idea who she was. I was just going back into my archives watching, and I think I don't remember how it came up, but the person I was talking to is like, Kris Wolf's great or whatever. And I learned half of these people are retired as I'm going through. And the way I was, she was hyped up, I was expecting one thing, and I was like, because as I had gotten into Joshi, I was just watching all these great wrestlers and ring wise, just these great hard hitting matches. First Kris Wolf match I see, I'm like, time out. This is a change. And I think that, but it gave you the full package of Stardom in many ways, especially during that era. It wasn't always the big, and even more so nowadays rather than back then. Back then had the goofiness, had the playfulness a little bit more, but ultimately in the end, Stardom's still about the big time matches. But when you can get something or someone like Kris Wolf who can give you a little bit of everything, again, step up into those roles, you get a greater appreciation. I know I did. I did, especially because I went in thinking one thing. I just thought Kris Wolf, I was like, oh, this could probably be like this terrifying badass. And I was like, whoa. And it was great. It was a great shock for me. Because I was like, oh, well, this is so much better than, just because you just hear the name. I didn't get any other really description. I was just like, oh, she's great. So I'm like, okay. And I just assume a million different other things instead. But
instead, you got this 5'0" girl, shorter than the kids, running around in a wolf tail and sticking the middle finger at everyone.
It was great. I mean, it was the perfect compliment to everyone else in that group.
And look, when you see a lot of Kris Wolf matches, they do tend to be in the lower card. And she's working with the kids, but it's all about building entertainment because
Important though.
Yes,
That's a very
yes.
important role.
If like, because I think a lot of people coming to Stardom, and I know I did when I started watching Stardom, I stuck with the main wrestlers I knew in the main events and the big matches. And it took me a while to go from that to watching full shows. If you have just only trainees and only bland characters finding themselves in the undercard, no one's going to stick around and watch. But if you've got someone like a Kris Wolf to add that entertainment factor, add that uniqueness to it, it gives you a bit more reason to pay attention and watch beyond just, let's see where these people go and grow. Natsu Sumi is another perfect example in this kind of role. She wasn't a main event caliber wrestler in Stardom, but whether you put her in the main event acting as the pin taker or the person to get beat up, or you put her in the opening couple of matches working the undercard and the kids, she served the role that provided a lot of value, not only for them growing through, but for the audience and getting entertained by a full picture show. And Kris Wolf did that exact same thing. She'd be in the multi-man main events with Oedo Tai, and she'd come in, do her little things, get her ass kicked, and it was all good fun. Or she'd be in the opening card, she'd be wrestling the kids, getting her ass kicked, occasionally getting one up on them themselves. But when you needed her to put on a little bit of a show, she was good enough in the ring that you could still be entertained. And some of the matches that we will recommend moving forward, if you wanted to see what Kris Wolf was all about, it's a nice mix of the comedy with doing enough in the ring to still be worth watching beyond just seeing the character work.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it on the head there, especially in explaining what kind of role and what she took on. Because again, being able to step up, or not play down, but play to the rookies and the kids, like that is, like I said, it's a very important aspect that I think overall people will kind of just overlook, especially now because most of the kids are just mixed in. It's not like they're not usually really open. Like they'll open the shows, but like they'll be with veterans most of the time.
Yeah.
Like they'll be like Shuri, and it's like, oh, okay. They're more pushed into the mix and maybe playing against the lower card like that. But again, it's important. And someone like her, she's smart, she's able, she was being a teacher. I know she taught English, but I just think like that mindset, even like you're gonna teach these people, kind of just teach them the ropes, teach them how to do the little things in your 5-minute match.
Yeah, the thing with Stardom, I think, and a lot of promotions, I think especially with Stardom, because you've got such a strong traineeship base. The people training you are some of the best in the world. And when Kris Wolf came in, she was trained by Fuka, which most of that generation were trained by Fuka. And it's wonderful going back and seeing what Kris Wolf has to say about Fuka. They seem to have a very special little connection. And I think, especially for Kris Wolf, having Fuka there was a big deal. Then she got trained by Nanae Takahashi. Obviously, when she debuted and as she was going through, the ghastly match happened, Nanae Takahashi left. In the aftermath of that, Io Shirai took over a lot of the training roles. So, I mean, just there, you've got 3 tremendous wrestlers training you and teaching you in different styles as well. So, like, you've got that traineeship base there. Most people going through Stardom are going to become competent wrestlers at a bare minimum. If you're good enough to stick around for a couple of years and make it on the shows and stuff, you're going to be a competent wrestler and do well pretty much anywhere. I think developing character is far less a guarantee. And that's not a knock on the Stardom system. That's just the reality. Like, doing physical actions, I think, is probably easy for a lot of people compared to coming up with a compelling character and gimmick that will get over with the fans. Working with a Kris Wolf, working with him in the ring, seeing how they incorporate everything, seeing how they work the crowd with their gimmicks is such a valuable tool for these young wrestlers. And that's why, like, you're looking at your Fukigen Deaths right now, your Kogamas right now, Natsu Samir from a couple of years ago in Stardom, Kris Wolf back then. That's so valuable, because the wrestlers coming in, they can see how the gimmick, the character stuff works and gets you over. You can work with your Shuris, you can work with your Momo Watanabes and learn what it's like to do wrestling right in the ring. But learning character, I think you really need a lot of reps with those experienced people. So having a Kris Wolf there, huge advantage.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to teach charisma and to teach that side of wrestling. You know, there's so often like when you watch wrestlers now and you see like, oh, they have this, you know, they have the charisma, they have personality. They can work on the other thing a lot easier. You know, the wrestling part, it comes to everyone. You know, I always use Unagi Sayaka for an example on that. She always had the charisma, right? The character that was going to connect with people. She could work on the wrestling, and that's what she did, right?
Yeah.
That is so, I think, if you don't really think about it, especially in the world of Joshi, because, you know, we, again, as international fans that we are, you know, we aren't always able to understand, you know, so it's character work that makes us understand. And again, while Kris Wolf could speak English, still character work goes so far because you're then the wrestlers that they're working off of are going to have character. You know, they're going to develop their character and so on and so forth. And we see that so much in today's Stardom, I think, with certain veterans. You know, you named the Fukigen Death. I'll even say like May Sarah's a perfect one. Now you want a newer person that, you know, that kind of has like this goofier character, and you may not know what she's saying, but you could figure out by actions and things that she does what she's doing, what she's thinking, and that's just so important. Again, so important to build those characters, build those just these roles that will connect with all audiences, because the wrestling is gonna, you know, the wrestling's the wrestling, right? Guess what? Every company has some great wrestlers, you know. Not every company has a great crop of characters and personalities, and I think that's just something that has pushed Stardom to the point they're at, and it comes from top to bottom.
And I think with Kris Wolf especially, it's kind of interesting to look at because you've got several different factors at work there. Kris Wolf is a very naturally outgoing, outlandish, excitable kind of person. She's coming into Japan as a foreigner where you're going to have the language barrier, you're going to have the cultural barriers, and that kind of character might work in a ring but doesn't always work behind the scenes. So she had to kind of work around coming in with one personality, going through training in another way, and then going back into the ring doing something different again. Yeah, it's interesting. Again, in one of the interviews she did, she was talking about how, like, you know, with Fuka, you could have a bit of a laugh with her. When the night Takahashi was training you, you didn't really crack jokes. You waited to see if they and the veterans cracked jokes. And if they started doing it, you might join in, but you didn't initiate that kind of thing. And then with Io Shirai, it was a little bit different again. But when she started wrestling, she, you know, in the training, she was kind of a little bit quieter, just let everything happen. I don't understand what they're saying. Let's just let the culture work through. Then she joined the wrestling, and Kyoko took her under the wing and basically said, you know, let your character out. You know, be what you need to be in the ring. Be that boisterous, be outlandish. Show that to the people to get back over. It would be such a difficult thing to be kind of bouncing back and forth between who you are, what you have to do behind the scenes, what you have to do in person, and, you know, dealing with the cultural barrier, dealing with the language barriers. It's such a fascinating situation, which, again, we're very fortunate to have a little bit of a peek behind the curtains with these English language interviews that Kris Wolf did. But it's such a fascinating look behind the curtain, and I think it's worth talking about and discussing and reaching through.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So Kris Wolf herself, like, yeah, she sort of came through. Her highlight was definitely the high speed championship match, you know, winning against Kagetsu Mayu Otani. And that was her shining moment. She joined the 5-Star Grand Prix, had a couple of runs there. Not the most impressive performances. One year she scored, yes. One year she scored 0 points. Next year she scored 1 point. Final year she scored 2 points in 2017.
That's building. If she was still wrestling, she'd be in contention right now.
Yeah, well, what we're in, you know, that's like 7 years ago. So basically, she'd be about 10 points now.
That's in contention. She would have lost the Red Stars block already, but that's in contention.
And it's kind of it's a sad thing to kind of look at now. It's like she's found herself in the golden era of Oedo Tai, and unfortunately, she left the company in 2018. She did a final year on the independent scene, eventually retiring
A lot
due
of
to
Eve, right?
yeah, she did a lot of work with Eve, and eventually retired, ultimately due to concussions. It is a little sad. Like you look at, she was with the company basically for 4 years. Her final match in the company was a retirement gauntlet, which is kind of the done thing in Stardom. The only difference is it wasn't her retirement gauntlet. It was Hiromi Momora's, who is another character we will no doubt do an episode like this on.
Love Hiromi Momora.
Oh, she's fantastic. But yeah, unfortunately, like she came in, she did her part, and when she left, she just kind of left with a whimper, not a bang. And I remember at the time people kind of being confused because, like, you having this big retirement stuff. Hiromi Mura did the gauntlet, and then she had a big final shelter at Kurikan Hall, and Kris Wolf just kind of faded off into the distance, and it was sad, not getting that proper send off. Don't know the full story, but I do. The impression I got was like she was probably feeling she was about done with wrestling. In that the wrestlers interview on Vice, I have mixed opinions about that documentary, but you do get a good insight again with Kris Wolf speaking and stuff. That was recorded around the time of the 2017 5-Star Grand Prix, based on the footage they're showing. The fact that she left about 6-8 months later, I think hearing her talk in that interview, you kind of sense like the time was coming up. She spoke about how no matter how long you're in Japan as a foreigner, you always feel like a foreigner. And there's just that cultural blockage there. It's very difficult for someone to move over there and truly ingratiate them into society, no matter how hard they work. You just always feel like a foreigner. You always feel separated. And it is interesting, like now we look at a lot of foreigners now coming into Stardom, whether it's for 8 to 10 month tours like Mariah May, whether they're trying to be there for a couple of years. Tekla's been in Japan for a long time now. Others coming in for short tours. It does open like a very interesting window into the unique challenges that a foreign wrestler has getting over in Japan, especially when you're talking Joshi and like you don't have the full backing of maybe a New Japan does.
Yeah, a lot of factors to hit there. So I'll go back to initially, the way she went out. I think for a lot of people it makes sense why you'd be upset. She made a lot of fans. She made a lot of fans. Again, this is why we're doing an episode, because if you're a longtime Stardom fan, you're likely a fan of what Kris Wolf accomplished, Kris Wolf did. And for me, the ability to connect with Kris Wolf came through her style. Being a high-speed wrestler, I always think it's the easiest like style to make someone want to watch. That's why I always am like, well, watch Azumi. She does pretty good at it. It's like, and I think that's like it works for Kris Wolf because then you add the goofier side in, the comedic side, and it's like, oh, this is a different flavor. It is what Kaori Oniyama has pretty much perfected in her Stardom career. She does it, as good as anyone. But Koguma, since she's come back, she does it really well. And of course, we know Koguma goes serious, and she could be one of the very best. But still, it is a role that works so perfectly well. The amount of people, and I think this would have went for Kris had she been around now compared to then. The amount of people I talk to are like, "Oh, Fuki, that's so dumb," but I love her. It's like I love the character. When I say dumb, it's like she just does that every single match. It's gonna come, but you love it every time. Even all these, she's been a clown forever. It's like I think Kris Wolf would have had even more of an impact because she did that. But there was a little more than just the clown aspect of Fuki and Death, right? Of like things like that. It would have been a lot like Koguma, I think, for a lot of people, because a lot of people love that. So just on that part, I think if you were to pick up Kris Wolf and put her into current Stardom, while it is a very different world now, she'd fit in like a glove, because I think she could have so many great comedic spots with so much of the roster who, when they get to do it, are so good at it. Now that the concussion things, that's always so upsetting. And we've seen so many wrestlers end not because they want to, because they have to. But like you said, with the foreigner stuff, I just, that's my one sad part. She had such a great long run in Stardom. That's the one thing, and I don't know how she feels about this, so I'm not speaking for her. Would love to talk to her sometime if she ever listens to this. I just would love to talk to you, Kris Wolf.
I have to work out the Norwegian time difference for us. That'd be a very unique situation.
Yeah, it's called. We would both accept waking up or doing whatever. We would probably be more on your guys' time than mine. I would have to take an L. It's fine. I'm used to it. Anyways, my point is that I think, or I hope, that even if she didn't get the send-off from Stardom that we would have wanted, that she knows she made such an impact on so many fans, and I'm sure so much of the roster, that even without that, people still are talking about her here in 2023. She's been out of Stardom for 5 years now, over 5 years, almost 6 years, and we were sitting here recording an episode about her. Like, I hope even if she didn't get that farewell, that she knows, like, she made that impact. Like, that's the big thing for me, because when wrestlers don't get to end their careers the way they want to, you just hope that they know, like, the fans really appreciated what they put into it. We did an episode on Risa Shiki. Like, that, injuries happen, unfortunately, and
we've hit the gamut. We've done people who didn't get a send off, and then we had Himika.
Yeah, Himika made up for everyone. She had the 7-month retirement ceremony. She got 3 retirement matches, actually. An incredible accomplishment. But like, that's the part, though, right? Like, when they do get their chance to retire the right way, they get such a great send off. So I hope, even though that Kris Wolf didn't get that from Stardom or her career ultimately, she knows that, or I think her last Eve match is a big gauntlet, though, right?
Yeah, she did get a send off, an independent send off.
Yes, I guess I mean in Stardom, though. Like, I wish, that's ultimately what I mean. I don't know how many people watched independent Kris Wolf after the fact. I don't know how easy it was to find Eve back in 2018 or whatever it was, 2019, I think. But overall, I just hope that she knows that she made this impact on Stardom. Stardom has a very long history now. A lot of amazing characters, wrestlers, so on. She was one of them.
Yeah, I know. Like, she was able to identify that she did have a solid fan base, especially international. Like, she, by her own admission, she noted, like, Japanese fans got involved with the gimmick and played along with it, but it was probably more the international fan base. People like myself who came into Stardom, slowly dipping their feet in the water and then seeing a character that they were able to understand and follow and sort of get. And especially Golden Era Oedo Tai, cannot stress this enough, were so over with the international fan base at this time. Everyone just adored what they did, and Kris Wolf obviously was a big part of that. So I know she recognized, like, the international fans who followed Stardom, how much they enjoyed her work. And the main thing you hope for is she feels like her work was respected and enjoyed as much as it was, and that she was able to go on and live a happy post-wrestling life. And thankfully, all reports are she's very happy in Norway with her partner doing Kris Wolf things. So it is a happy sort of story, happy finish and all of that. But it is fun to go back and look at the history of Kris Wolf and the character of Kris Wolf and the impact that she has on the wrestling scene, because you're absolutely right when you said, like, Kris Wolf, if you transported her into 2023 Stardom, would still fit in like a glove. The wrestling level, she would be on the lower end of the high-speed talent, but her character work would get her booked. Whether she was doing stuff with the current era of Oedo Tai, which I could see her fitting in wonderfully with. I could see her being a pin take on a Donna Del Mondo, being that hyperactive, not the Natsupoi character, but that kind of excitable lower card presence for them. I could see her filling that kind of role as well. She would fit in, and honestly, she'd fit in with the wrestling scene better in 2023. Like, I was watching her matches, and, like, I was just thinking, imagine if Choco Pro was running back then. You chuck her in Choco Pro, and she fits like a glove. chuck her in AEW. It's like a lower card comedy act for them in the women's division.
Yeah.
She would get over with that crowd because that crowd
absolutely.
really digs that kind of character heavy, gimmick heavy stuff that really just clicks. Yeah, she would get over in those situations. The current Eve situation she'd do great in as well.
Point. I think that's a great point. Thinking of like the current wrestling landscape, she would be so over. You know, like even if it wasn't Stardom, like you said, that character, because that, you know, then she could back it up in the ring. It would do wonders. So I even think of that. So yeah, it's a great call there. And I think for me, like, the reason I ultimately love what was accomplished in her career is, again, you know, she did so many things. While it wasn't all titles and stuff, she still did so many things that are such key parts of Stardom's history. And, you know, I'm not going to, if anyone's listening to this and you want to see like Kris Wolf outside the ring, just like go watch any Oedo Tai promo ever.
Yeah.
Just like, it's just so fantastic. It's why if you listen to, like, if you ever saw people tweet about this when you got into Stardom over the past couple of years, like how people are upset about no more pre-match promos, it's because of what Oedo Tai was doing with their pre-match promos. So just go and like find those. It's pretty easy. Find an Oedo Tai match from that era, watch it. You know, you're just gonna get something. Even if it's like nothing, it's something, you know?
Yeah, it's funny, like, because you look back at a lot of the pre-match promos, and you could tell they were kind of just filling a bit of a hole. You go in, you say a couple of things, you move forward. And it's funny how many people yearn for that. And part of it, I think, is people like us who don't speak Japanese, you know, Stardom, they subtitled that. So we got a bit of an insight into what the characters were saying, what they were doing before a match. Very valuable stuff. But a lot of it was like, I'm going to do my best, this person's mean, you know, fighting, that kind of stuff. Oedo Tai just took it and ran with it. And whether it was the group promos where they're all kind of feeding off of each other, or the individual stuff where the character stuff just shined, they were so funny and so good. And Kris Wolf was at the heart of that. And realistically, like most people, that when you say Kris Wolf, their first image of Kris Wolf is going to be these pre-match promos, talking about, you know, that she likes the taste of meat and that she wants to eat little children before going out and fighting like a 13-year-old Ruaka and a 15-year-old Azumi. Like that was at the heart of it. And bouncing off, especially Hana Kimura, you know, those, like, it's almost cheating to say, oh, this person in Oedo Tai had a good connection with Hana. But it's true. Kris Wolf and Hana played off of each other masterfully. Her and Kagetsu played off of each other masterfully. Even I was watching a Kris Wolf versus Momo Watanabe match, and this is when Tam was manager, and they were doing stuff together, and Tam would bring Pichan up and, you know, feasting on Momo. She held her against the ropes and stuff. And it's just the little interactions. Yeah, if you want to know why Kris Wolf is popular, don't skip the pre-match promos.
Bingo. Never ever skip. Well, never skip pre-match promos as is if you're watching some old stuff. But definitely if you hear this episode and you want to go watch Kris Wolf, those will only help the matter of fact. But I guess we should give the good people some matches to watch of Kris Wolf's career.
Yeah. So the good thing is I think Kris Wolf at her best was in 2017. You know, just before she'd wrap things up with retirement with Stardom. And, you know, she'd been in the business long enough to find her groove as a wrestler. So my recommendations are all kind of centered around that period, but it's with good reason. The first is, you can probably guess, the high-speed championship match that she had. It was Kris Wolf versus Kagetsu versus Mayu Iwatani. This is at Korakuen Hall, February 23, 2017. You get a wonderful mix of character work, of comedy, but that high-speed wrestling. You know, you see the sort of the DNA of what you get with your Azumis and Starlight Kids and Natsupoi now in 2023 in how they were working this. Very fast, lots of little spot-heavy stuff. And then you get the Golden Era Oedo Tai doing their thing. You know, just, if I can swear, shithousery, you know, the elastic band tape, the Hana Kimura tripping Mayo at ringside and stuff. It's incredibly entertaining. It's the high point of her career, which is another reason why I recommend it. But it is a really good match. And my other recommendation is also involves Hana Kimura. It's their 5-star Grand Prix match at Kirkenhall, September 18, 2017. This is just very gimmick and comedy heavy. But again, it's Oedo Tai versus Oedo Tai, which is always, must-watch television as far as I'm concerned. And the whole thing is built around Hana Kimura taunting and teasing Kris Wolf with meat, actual literal meat. It's you might have seen GIFs and clips of it roaming around in there. It's just a lot of fun. It's classic Stardom from this era. Yeah, there's some good wrestling just mixed in with a lot of fun.
Yeah, so I got 2 matches as well. The first, I said this to Trent. He's like, "Really?" The first one is because we talked about it on an episode. But does everyone remember the gauntlet tag that I talked about? That was fantastic. It's the 10-person tag.
January 2018.
Yes. Kris Wolf was in that of all of 8 seconds. It was her and Azumi that started the match off. But I can't stress enough how important that role is, because it just creates an entire feeling for the rest of the match for Oedo Tai, right? It becomes almost desperation from there. And it's just so important because it's like, oh my God, what happened? It's the beauty of the shock pin. It's the beauty of really what Azumi's so good at, but what high-speed wrestling is so good at as well. So watch that if you haven't, even if you just want to watch the Kris Wolf part, because you've probably already watched it. Go back and watch it, get an appreciation.
There's a lot of character work in that spot too. Like for 8 seconds, they do fit a fair bit of story in there.
And the other one is from the 2017 5-star Grand Prix. She had a main event match with Mayu Iwatani. That's a nice sprint. It's a nice sprint main event spot for Kris. So obviously, it's a little more serious. I think there's a great comment on like Cage Match that's like, this is like a match that if you had a bunch of gifts from it, you would just be amazed, because it's like, and I think gifable matches, like especially with how the 5-star was back then compared to now, if it's a fun sprint and you can get a bunch of spots in there, they packed a lot in. I think the match was 751. They packed a lot in. It gives you Kris in a big match against someone Mayu Iwatani. I think that's why I kind of want to give that one, because it's not as comedic as the Hana Kimura one with real meat.
Yes.
But
you get to see more of the wrestling side of Kris Wolf.
Yes, which I think is just as important. But you want all of it. You got to get the full picture. My first match was kind of comedy because it's like, she didn't in it long, but she was always out there. You can watch. You kind of watch in a lot of ways. That is just, again, getting the feeling of Oedo Tai from that period too. And that was, what was that, 2018? So right before she left. So there you go.
It's a couple of good matches there and a good mix of things. The good thing is, if you are going back and watching Kris Wolf and getting an idea for her, there's no 30-minute epics that you really have to.
No, you can watch a bunch of matches and it'll become 30 minutes.
Well, the good thing is, like, we've all recommended mostly the singles matches, but you can really chuck on any multi-person time match from 2017 with her in it, and you get a good taste of her, because, again, she was a role player. She was a bit of a larger whole that was that period of Oedo Tai. And they all work together wonderfully. You can go back and watch the earlier stuff as well, but I think it's 2017 when she just finds the right mix of her voice, is in the right situation with Oedo Tai, and the wrestling has gotten to a point where it is quite entertaining to watch. And it's not a case of every time she tags in, you go, oh, okay, here we go.
Yeah.
It's entertaining. It's good to watch.
Thankfully, there's a great, like, the one of the best things about Stardom Road is you can go to the year and you can pretty much just pick any show. Pick the match, she's in. They'll give you
Look for the Kirk and Halls, as is what we always recommend if you're going back and watching around this time.
Yes,
look for Kirk and Halls.
Feel of how the crowds reacted to her and stuff like that. And I think a lot of the time, this is a personal thing, but I always wish wrestling streaming services had a randomizer so that they could just give you like a random match. It'd be so much
Yeah.
easier, just be like, all right, give me something fun today. What am I watching? But pretty much do that with 2017. Just go through a bunch of events, pick one. You'll have a good time.
You can search, so just type in Kris Wolf in the search bar and you'll find her matches. Like it's a better system than say New Japan, where you can type a name in and you don't know what you're gonna get. Type Kris Wolf in the Stardom, you know what you're
every event in the history of New Japan if you type in Hiroshi Tanahashi, for example. So you can only do so much. But yes, Kris Wolf, go see what she did in her time with Stardom. I think it's very much worth your time.
Yeah, she was a fun character, and the fact is, like, I was looking at, out of curiosity, I was doing a little bit of research, and I found a Reddit thread from last year, 2022, and it was just titled, "Does anyone miss Kris Wolf?" And there's like 25, 30 comments, and everyone, even the people who weren't watching back then, who like yourself had gone back and looked at stuff, it's all just filled with like, oh yeah, I remember her. She was a lot of fun. Like, everyone just has positive vibes and memories thinking about Kris Wolf when she was in Stardom, because she was a fun character. She knew her role and she played it to perfection.
That's all you can ask for out of,
and it leaves an impact.
I have a great role player like Kris Wolf. Great role player. But I guess that's it for Stardom Road this time around. If you like what you heard, give us a nice little 5-star rating, or if you liked most of what we heard, I guess 4 is okay, but I prefer 5. I prefer 5.
Even if half of
5-star
good,
like the
5.
GP. 5-star like the GP. It's Stardom Road. We need to have 5 stars. You ruin the flow otherwise. But Trent, do you have anything for the people to keep an eye out for ahead of, I don't know, our next episode?
Yeah, look, easiest thing is just to follow me on Twitter /X at OneUpCulture. Anything I write will be posted there, links and all of that jazz. Same with podcasts, obviously. Like, if you like Scott and I, we also have another podcast, Ocean Cyclone Show, with Ryan Dilbert. That's always a lot of fun. And even though this is a Stardom podcast, I also do ChocoCast with Wrestling, which I did allude to earlier, and that is a bit of fun as well. If you like the Kris Wolf character and you haven't found Choco Pro yet, you know where you need to go.
Kris Wolf and Choco. That would have been perfect. That would have been too perfect almost. But yes, if you want to follow me at Scott E Wrestling on Twitter /X. I always think of, like, when we say the X thing now, it's like with this podcast, especially if anyone finds it like a few years down the road, what the hell is that thing going to be called? Will it exist? There's many questions. There
might not be an X to find us on.
Yeah, there might not be anything, but
be nothing.
Either way, content wise, lots of podcasts, stuff like that. Reviewing the 5-star Grand Prix, if that floats your boat. Maybe you're years down the line, you just got into Stardom and you're like, oh, I want to watch some 5-star Grand Prix matches to really get into it from 2023. I got you covered. Those reviews are over on voiceofwrestling.com. I don't do every single show. I thankfully share them, but if you want some great
can you read
reviews,
Scott's reviews?
Yeah, read my reviews. I've reviewed both of the Cork and Hall shows, which are pretty big. I reviewed the really good KBS Hall show.
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
Kyoto.
yes.
The one with the stained glass.
Yes, which had some of the best matches. So I reviewed those. So I think you're covered there. Just go check those out. No one else does reviews, just me. And otherwise, that's it. We'll be back next time. It'll be for our October month, so I'm sure we'll have something creative there. We have some ideas, but we're not going to say them officially. We don't know the order yet. Once we know the order, you'll know, because the episodes be out.
You'll be listening to them.
But make sure you listen to the Count Out Podcast Network. We have a lot of podcasts on there, including Your Dose of Death, Ring Post Radio. Ring Post Radio is my show, actually. So I feel
you didn't shout that out first.
No. If you want to listen to that, I mean, that's me talking about like everything else that isn't Joshi, which is a very unique twist on my usual output. That show, I just kind of say things, don't really think about them. So maybe that floats your boat. But otherwise, for Trent, I'm Scott, and this was the Stardom Road podcast right here on the Count Out. You gonna say something?
No.
Oh, it looked like you were going to say something. You completely messed me up with my show closing. It was the cleanest show close I ever had, but it looked like you needed to say something. So
I think it
do
was
that.
too clean for your own sake, so you're looking for an out.
That's probably true. But for Trent, I'm Scott.
It's ruined now.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Ring Post Radio is the only show hosted by Ryan Knightsey and Scotty Edwards that talks about the entire world of professional wrestling. With new episodes coming out every Sunday, there is absolutely no reason to not listen to real, honest wrestling opinions from two crazy maniacs. Have a hot boy summer and listen along to Ring Post Radio every Sunday on the Countout Network. This has been a Countout Podcast.